So, how do we get there? How do we get to the point where Germany, from being deprived of many various different uh, land components that it had gained during the First World War, became once more a power force and an expansionist force in Central Europe? Um, I should begin by saying that once Hitler consolidates his power and the Nazi Party becomes the ruling power of the ruling party in Germany, um, at the same time, in a kind of uh, reaction to the global economic crisis, Germany is starting, that's to say, from 1933 onwards, gradually its economy is picking up, industrial production is rising, and there are projects for the creation of a great German empire in Eastern Europe. The idea, the strategic thinking behind this is that for Germany to become great again, it needs to acquire more territory, especially in its, as it were, eastern periphery within Europe, uh, because these kinds of mostly agricultural land will give Germany the resources needed for it to develop and secure its dominance in the world. This is the famous idea of the so-called Lebensraum, living space, the geopolitical idea that for Germany to become dominant in the world, the space around it, especially in Eastern Europe, should become attached to the own, should become part of that empire. Um, so for Germany, it is not only, and this is important to realize, at first, the revisionist claims of Germany are simply based, at least that's how they're presented, on the question of national self-determination. For instance, they argue that we have a right to exercise our control in places, in spaces around our border where we have German minorities. That is the case of Czechoslovakia, as we have seen, that a part of Czechoslovakia has a thriving German minority. So this is what is presented to the Allies in Munich in September in 1938. Germany is pushing for the Allies to recognize that that Germany should control this a part of Czechoslovakia. So the first, as it were, claim in the international field is one of self-determination. We simply want, that's what they say, to not to create an empire in Europe, but we just want to unite in places, to add places to the German Third Reich, where German minorities live. And this is the bait, in a way, that the leading power at the time, Britain, kind of takes. And in September 1938, the British Prime Minister, Neville Chamberlain, as I'm sure you all know, travels to Munich and negotiates a kind of agreement that de facto partitions Czechoslovakia. A part of Czechoslovakia is to be ruled by Germany, and that the expectation in Britain and France is that will create the conditions for a lasting peace settlement. However, this is far from the case. This is only one step in a careful strategic plan that Germany has to actually extend its domination across Eastern Europe. And by the way, I should mention here that Germany is not really interested in acquiring more colonies in Africa. There are plans at the same time being thrown around by Chamberlain and others, promising some kind of colonies in Africa if Germany were to halt its expansionist operations. But obviously, this is not agreed on, because Germany doesn't really care about creating an empire anywhere. It really cares, and that's the plan for domination, on acquiring more territory around its borders, especially in Eastern Europe. A second event that happens nearly a year after the Munich Agreement, which I must, and then it shows the futility of that agreement, is the signing, and it's a quite gripping moment in the drama that led to the Second World War, of the so-called Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. Don't know if you're aware of it. What happens there? Russia is another key player at the time, and until 1938, Russia doesn't play a role in the Munich Agreement. The Munich Agreement is between Germany and Britain, France, and Italy also plays a role in the Munich Agreement. That supposedly, as I said earlier, it will stabilize Germany's. The thinking is that it will stabilize Germany's expansionist pretenses by just giving them part of Czechoslovakia and hopefully creating a lasting peace. That is not the case. Germany quickly extends its power and its rule over Czechoslovakia, and actually it has more aggressive visions about Eastern Europe. And there we get, and Russia is excluded from these discussions with Britain and France. Now, nobody really expects, and Stalin really prevaricates, meaning he's in two minds about this, whether Russia should actually side with Britain and France, or whether Russia, having been excluded, should be opting for its own kind of agreement with Germany. And the second thing happens. Nobody really expected it. In August 1939, the foreign minister of Russia, Molotov, signs a non-aggression pact with Germany. Now, there's a lot of discussion about the nature of this pact, what exactly it means. For instance, there are many that are claiming that, well, Russia would see the war coming and they just thought of buying time. There are others who are have a more ruthless, as it were, approach to this by saying, well, Russia sided with Germany because they just felt they would divide Eastern Europe in spheres of influence. There's also this pact is quite controversial and keeps on being discussed as we speak. What is interesting here is that it has a secret clause, and the secret clause is Poland. And this is actually the trigger that allows Britain and France to declare war on Germany. What happens with the Molotov after the signing of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact is that Germany moves on to a part of Poland, and Russia kind of extends its influence and its army through another part of Poland. Now, this was stipulated, the boundaries of this kind of partition of Poland were stipulated in a secret clause of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact that will become known to the world only in the 1990s, and it's important, after the collapse of the Soviet Union. Now, the German aggression into Poland is the last straw. That prompts Britain and France to declare war on Germany. And here I'd like to show you a little clip from the time on how one of Poland's military leaders, General Sikorski, is being, as it were, welcomed to Britain.
Polish land has been conquered, but you can't conquer the spirit of a people. That spirit still lives here in Britain. At a Scottish port, Poland's new Prime Minister, General Sikorski, inspects a detachment of the Polish Navy. He visits 2 destroyers, whose officers and men sailed them out of the Baltic. They passed through the teeth of Germany's minefields and heavy guns, safe into British waters. Now they're cooperating with the Royal Navy until victory comes and a free Poland is re-established.
Until victory comes and a free Poland is re-established. This also goes on to show how the key role that Britain had throughout the Second World War, it harbored an unprecedented number of exiled governments, like the government of Poland, like Yugoslavs, Greeks, the French, famously, after the collapse of France, Charles de Gaulle moves into London. So London and Britain becomes this kind of hub for anti-Axis activities, and specifically a refuge for a lot of not only emigres from Central Europe, Jewish emigres. Freud, for instance, the founder of psychoanalysis, through Paris makes it to London and spent the last days of his life here in London. But also political leaders such as Sikorski and many others. Let me move on. A key moment in the progression of the war is obviously the Paris occupation of France. And I have to say here that opens another chapter, and this is the chapter of the different kinds of regimes that the Nazis put in place in the places they conquer. In France, and this is a trauma for France even today, there is a section of the political elite at the time that collaborates with the Germans. So the Germans do not occupy France, do not exercise political authority over France directly. They do collaborate, they do install a regime of collaborators, which is French politicians. General Pétain, the leader of the First World War, a military leader of the First World War, becomes the key figure that sets up in France a government that collaborates with the Germans. And at the same time, there is resistance in France in another part of France. So far, France is politically quite divided, and obviously these are divisions that are really running through today. They have cast a long shadow in French politics. Well, after that, we have after a period of phony war, the Battle of Britain, that you're all familiar with, the Blitzkrieg, and the very key moment by which the war becomes explosive is the launching of the Operation Barbarossa. The pact of non-aggression is over, and Germany finally makes a move to acquire more territory in the Russian lands. Where we are a few months later, Japan, who is in alliance with Germany and Italy, makes a move in the South Pacific against the Americans, the attack at Pearl Harbor. So by December 1921, the war is becoming a truly global war, fought in different seas, with two, broadly speaking, crystallized, as it were, sides. The one is the Axis powers, Italy, Germany, and Japan. The other one is the powers that are resisting Axis occupation, Britain, France, the part of the resistance in France anyway, and most importantly, America, who enters the war right after the Pearl Harbor attack. And what happens is where the world is in early 1942, the world is in a really bad place, in the sense that Germany is materializing its vision of expanding in the East, but not only in the East, in the South. For instance, places like Greece, Germany, and Italy occupy Greece. Also in Scandinavia, in Sweden, in Denmark, and elsewhere, we have regimes that are puppet regimes friendly to Nazi Russia. Excuse me, yeah, my God, I'm sorry, but friendly to Nazi Germany. All things swirl in my mind today. So we will leave it here. I hopefully have explained to you the different kinds of events, and the choreography of events, and the sequencing of events that take us to the big outbreak of the war. And I should note here that as Germany expands in the East, then the Jewish question becomes all the more thorny and important. And in the third segment that will quickly follow, we will discuss the Holocaust, what led to it, and how we can make sense of it.